different plants. But that's the first thing to know, and that's the most important thing about selecting a plant, is giving it the proper amount of light. Second thing is choosing the plant carefully to begin with. Now, I just mentioned, that the way a plant looks is a reflection of the care that the plant got a few weeks before. Your best indication of the health of a plant is always the newest growth on the plant. The newest leaves that are coming out at the top of the plant. The older leaves, don't pay a lot of attention to them. They may very well have gotten beaten up in shipping, or who knows what the problem may have been with them. But I don't worry about losing an old leaf every now and then, and believe me, some of these leaves do get a little banged up in transit. But if the new growth on a plant looks good, that is your best indication that the plant is healthy. On the other hand, if all the old growth looks great, but the new growth looks wimpy, don't buy it. There's something going wrong with that plant. Now, choosing a plant can be very important too, because depending on the environment that the plant grew up in, the plant may or may not be a real good choice for inside your house, because plants actually form a whole different leaf structure in the shade than they do in the sun. I remember teaching freshman biology, we actually had microscope slides of a sun leaf and a shade leaf. And the things are just rearranged totally different inside the leaf structure. The arrangement of the cells is different, the arrangement of the chloroplast within the cells is different, the arrangement of the little layers within the chloroplast, called the lamellae, is different. But a plant that grows in the sun or in the shade, they're just two totally different things. And on a microscopic level, you can look at this and you can tell whether that plant was growing in the sun or in the shade. Okay, now you say, so what? Well, the difference is that the leaves can't change. And if you take a plant that's been grown in too much sunlight and then you put it in a lower light area, those leaves aren't adapted to growing in that lower light area, so what do? They fall off. And the plant, if you're lucky, starts rebuilding, starts making new leaves that are better adapted to that kind of light level. Once again, you say, well, why is that important? Well, it depends on how and where the plant has been grown. A plant can be grown a whole lot faster in a really, really sunny area. I'll use Ficus benjamina, this plant right here, as an example. If you drive through Dade County, Florida, down around Miami, you will see fields of these plants growing in containers out there. They can grow them up in a big hurry, and because they can grow them in a hurry, and because they're, not in a greenhouse, they can grow them pretty cheaply. And that's the plant that's going to go into the box store or go into the grocery store or whatever else. And I won't ask for a show of hands, just smile if you're guilty of this. How many people have taken a ficus home and all the leaves fell off of it? Yeah, that's a very, very common problem, and people blame themselves, and it wasn't your fault to begin with. That plant was grown in such a high light condition that there's no way that it would adapt even to a sunny spot in your living room. So how do you get around this? You grow the plants under fairly high shade. We specify that all the house plants that we get are grown somewhere between 60 and 80% shade. It takes them longer to grow, and it means that we're going to get charged more money for them because it may take twice as long for the ficus to get up to that size. But when you take that plant home, if you put it in the right place, it's not going to shed, half the leaves on the plant like the other one does. And I always tell people, we talk about the prices of plants. And you need to think of a greenhouse as a fairly expensive hotel. Take it from someone who's paid $10,000 a month propane bills and things like that on our big greenhouse, and you don't want to know what our heating bills around here are in the winter months. But think of the greenhouse where these things are grown as a hotel room, and think about how long that plant stayed there. Some plants are fairly fast growing. These ficus, for instance, are a fairly fast growing plant. And so they don't run up too much of a bill while they stayed in that greenhouse. This plant is a Rhapis palm, and this plant is very, very slow growing. And this plant had to sit in that greenhouse for about 4 times as long to get to be the same size as the ficus tree did right there. This plant ran up a little bit bigger hotel bill. And that's why, although those two plants may be about the same size, this one probably costs 3 or 4 times as much as that one does. It's not because it's a rarer plant, it's not because it's more difficult to grow, it's because it spent a longer period of time being grown before it was up to a size that you would like to have it and put it in your home. That's what makes the difference in the price of plants. Where they are grown and how long it took them to grow up to a given size. Any questions about light or, anything like that? Yes, ma'am.
Office. Almost no light. I had a Chinese evergreen.
Uh-huh.
And I rescued it back to my porch because it didn't like the office. So what other low light plant can I put there?
Well, Chinese evergreen is one of the better low light plants.
It did do well.
Probably the toughest and hardiest plant of all is Sansevieria.
Okay.
I won't call it by its unkind name, mother-in-law Tom. A very brave man named that plant. Can you imagine taking a stiff old sharp thing like this and calling it mother-in-law's tongue? You wouldn't live long in today's society if you named plants that, or I guess maybe you did it anonymously or whatever. But that's one of the toughest and hardiest plants of all, and it'll probably last longer than just about anything else in your office. Sometimes you'll find that you are able to switch out the light bulbs, and believe me, your eyes will be happier with daylight white than they are cool white. Most offices put either a warm white or cool white in their fluorescent fixtures. If you get them to switch them to daylight white, you will work better and more comfortably. Your eyes will be more comfortable, and your plants will be much happier as well.
There's like virtually no indirect sunlight at all. It's all overhead light. There's like one living plant. The rest all died.
Well, there are about 6 different kinds of Sansevieria. Surround yourself with them, and your air will be better in your office.
I do. It's like kind of like home and work. When I take a plant to work, it's stressed out. I take it home, it gets happy again. So I think my office environment. I go to work, I start sneezing. I'm allergic to work.
There may be a
or the air.
There may be a message in there for you somewhere, but we'll worry about your plants today. The other thing I'll tell you about light in plants is that the closer a plant is to the light, obviously, the happier it is, but you might not realize how much the difference in the light it gets is when it's close. Scientifically, they say that light diminishes by the inverse of the square. What that means in our language is that at 2 feet, a plant gets 1/4 as much light as it does at 1 foot. At 3 feet, it gets 1/9 as much. At 4 feet, it gets 1/16 as much. So this plant, if the light's over there, the plant's not going to be nearly happy as if the plant's sitting right directly underneath the light. So if you have any way of rearranging in your office to where they're as close to the lights as possible, they will certainly do better.
Can that plant go outside at any time?
It can go outside at any time the temperature is above 34 degrees.
Above 30.
Yeah. Even though it may look tough, these things come out of North Africa in an area that it never gets cold. And they will freeze. They will turn to mush at 31 degrees. So be sure you don't leave them outside on a cold night.
What about the rubber plants? How do those work?
They're very bright light plants.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll talk about all the different kinds of plants in just a minute or two. I want to talk, before we start talking about individual plants, like I say, if you get the light issue down, you've got 95% of the problem solved. But the plants we see with light problems, or with health problems, light is virtually always the cause of those problems. Watering, I guess we have to talk a bit about watering because you can cause your plants problems by improper watering. And notice I didn't say overwatering. There really is no such thing as overwatering. You can water too often, but when you water a plant, you need to water it very thoroughly. And that's where we see one of the problems. People will, they'll water it often, but they never really water it thoroughly enough to get the water all the way through the pot. I'm sure you've had plants live long enough to need repotting, but when you take a plant out of a pot, 90% of the roots are in the bottom 10% of the pot. And if you don't water thoroughly enough to get that water all the way through, you can keep the soil on the top spongy wet and the plant's, you know, dying of thirst because the water really hasn't gotten down